All right, hello once again. Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD 1000 Web Development Technologies course, I've been creating a series of video presentations based on the Mozilla Developer Network Learn Web Development series. I'm in the CSS portion and we're going over layouts, and there are about 13 topics in here. There they are. So far we've gone the overview, the introduction to layouts, normal flow, flexbox, grids, floats, position, multiple column positioning. So we're down to responsive design. All right, so that's about the 9th or 8th, whatever, of that's in here. So let's take a look just to show you what responsive design means. Hopefully you notice that this page is responsive. And you'll notice that as I go and make this smaller, watch the size of this right here. And you'll see that it gets smaller. This goes down. It's not fantastic, but it's actually very well thought out and very well set up. So this right here is a responsive page. And as they mention here, in the early days of web design, pages were built to target desktops, to be honest with you. And if you had a larger or a smaller screen than that, in a lot of ways you were just you were hosed. But as more diverse screen sizes became available, the concept of RWD, or responsive web design, appeared and became more and more important. Now, one thing to mention, they may mention it in here, they may not. But one thing to quickly tell you is when you are going through this stuff, first of all, there's at least a couple ways that you can do this. You can either create one site that has components in it for both larger screens and smaller screens. All right, so in other words, you can have like a mobile, part of your site and a non-mobile part of your site, or you can create two different sites. For instance, I am originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, so I still get my copy of the Journal Sentinel online every day. There it is. All right. And the thing about this is I can come in here and let's look. And you'll notice it's not responsive. Why? Because it was not designed to be read, for example, on a phone. If I want to do that, and if I bring it up in my phone, I think it's called m_jsonline.com, which is the mobile version of this. So you can either have one or two versions, depending on how you want to set this up. The other thing about this too, and again, I'm sure we'll get into this at some point or another, if not in this particular lecture, then in one soon, is it's become more in vogue today that if you can do so, you want to design responsibly, and you want to design responsively in that you want to typically design first for a smaller device. Now, I'm not saying I'm going to do that. I don't know yet. I haven't done anything for what we're going to be doing at the end of this, and that is creating our actual website. Since we already have the beginning of it, and it's in there, and it's in there as a non-responsive site, that's probably where we'll start, and then we will add some media queries, etc. onto it. So it says at one point in history, you had two options when you designed a website. You could create a liquid site, which would stretch to fill the browser window, or a fixed width site. So these two approaches tended to result in a website that looked its best on the screen of the person designing the site. That looks pretty okay. That doesn't. All right. So as it says here, the fixed width site risked a horizontal scroll bar on smaller screens. All right, it says as seen below. So you'd have something like this. All right. As mobile became more and more important, you may have heard this in my classes or in another class, but as of around 2017, the majority of people who go out to a website are no longer going on a laptop or desktop rather, the majority are using a mobile device, which is defined as being either their phone or a tablet. All right, so there's more than 50% now on average that are referencing using either a tablet or they are using a phone. All right. So as mentioned here, as the mobile web started to become a reality, companies that wish to embrace mobile would create a special version of their site with a different URL. Again, often starting with an M or something like that. All right, or ending with a .mobi. This meant that two separate versions of the site had to be developed and kept up to date. All right, so as mentioned then in here, these mobile sites offered a very cut down experience. So oftentimes, for example, they might not have the a lot of the images. All right, things that would display well on a bigger screen probably wouldn't show, and would and if they weren't designed to look very nice on a smaller screen, they literally just wouldn't show on there then. All right, so a number of approaches were developed to try to kind of fix this problem. In 2004, Cameron Adams wrote a post entitled Resolution Dependent Layout, describing a method of creating a design that would adapt to different screen resolutions. As it said, this required JavaScript to detect the screen resolution and load the correct CSS. Zoe Gillenwater was instrumental in her work to describe and formalize the different ways in which flexible sites could be created. And again, there's links to all this stuff if you're interested. So the term responsive design was coined about 10 or 11 years ago by Ethan Marcotte. And again, you can take a look at that. And it says and described the use of three techniques in combination with one another. First, as mentioned here, all right, the first idea was the idea of fluid grids, already being explored by some of the other people. The second was fluid images, and the third was the media query. And the media query is what we are going to end up talking about in the next part or the next lesson of this series. With media queries, all right, with media queries, the key thing is that you typically, it's CSS, but you put the CSS in there and you put it in a media tag where you put in minimum and or maximum screen size where you want something to appear, disappear, happen, not happen, etc. All right, kind of an important point here. As it says, it's important to understand that responsive web design is not a separate new technology. It's a new way of looking at a situation. All right, so as it says here, the next thing is media queries, which I thought were going to be their own. All right, so again, it looks like we will go into it next, but let's just jump into it. So it says responsive design was only able to emerge due to the media query. So I'm not going to read a lick of that, but let's look at this. All right. And notice it says media screen. So this is only meant to be the screen. In other words, not to be applied for printing or something else. And it says here, when your width reaches a minimum of 800 pixels. That means 800 pixels and above. All right. In that case, that's the CSS that's there for the container class should be applied. And what is that? That is saying setting a 1em margin for top and bottom and a 2em margin from left and right. You can add multiple media queries within a style sheet. You don't have to put them in any real kind of order, but typically what people do is they either go from small to big or big to small. All right. So as it says, the common approach there is to create a single column layout when it gets narrow enough. And you already saw this, that when we shrunk this down, you saw how that became a single column in here. All right. So more on media queries in the next lesson that we will go through. All right. So modern layout methods, as it says, such as multi-column layout, flexbox, and grid, are responsive by default. They all assume that you're trying to create something that should look good on all screens. So multi-col, as it says, is the lowest. So let's come back in here and do this. All right. So it says it works out the size and will change according to screen size. So let's copy this. Go back into here. Let's get rid of that card that we had and let's bring it back so we just have the container. It may end up looking a little hinky, but I don't know. All right, so we're going to come in here then and put in this. All right, no biggie, but let's take and shrink this down. Well, it may have said that it was basically set up to be, it doesn't look terrible. I mean, in that it is readable, but it's not what I'd call very professional looking. So as it says, if you instead use the column width, you can put in the maximum width. So let's look at that and see if that changed anything. All right, and now let's shrink that down. Well, as far as I can tell, that looks a lot better. It put it into a one-column format as opposed to what we had here, which was a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 column format. So it was naturally responsive is a way you can look at it. Now that doesn't mean to say that you might not still have to come in and do some tweaking with a media query or something else. You still may have to do so, but it doesn't look bad from the get-go, which means you've got a good start. All right. In Flexbox, flex items will shrink and distribute space between the items, etc. So let's come in here and do this. All right, so we now have that. Let's refresh. Okay. You can see how it looks, but let's see if it's responsive. All right. Now, it had said that it was. I don't find there to be any responsiveness in this at all. But it is also possible that it's something else that we had done up above here that's keeping that from happening. So I'm looking for something. Let's see, container flex, item. Well, we don't have any items in here, so that may be what it is. We've got class equal card. So we may have to go in and make a change. Let's see. Because I don't think we have anything that's in here with a class of item. So try something here. Maybe this will work, maybe it won't. Let's change card to item. So we've now got that in here. Let's again go back to here and refresh. Doesn't look any different here, but will it here? Doesn't look like it's going to. No. All right, so there's going to be some more that we're going to have to do in this. I shouldn't be jumping ahead, but grid will do the same kind of thing. The big thing, let's jump down to images. All right. And as it says, the simplest approach to responsive images says you take an image is to take the largest size it'll possibly need. So max width of 100%. Now, if we go back, and this is back almost in the Wayback Machine here, but if we go back and we take a look at what we had been working on before, and that is when we were working on, I don't even know if I still have it in here. Oh, I know it because it's in here. There it is. Our site. All right. Our image, remember before we said 50%. All right. What if we come in here and say max width 100%? All right. Is that going to look any different? So this was our I Love Missouri that we'd been working on. We still may have that open in here. There it is. So refresh. Okay. Is it going to be responsive? It already was, so I imagine it still is going to be. But what you should notice is when it gets down to here, it's taking up 100% or as close as it can to 100%. See that? When it reaches a certain break point here, now it's taking up less. So as it says here, the simplest approach was at the largest size that might be needed and scale it down. But as mentioned, there are obvious downsides to this approach. The image might be displayed a lot smaller than its intrinsic size. All right. A mobile user, that may really affect them if you give it a max width. All right. It may resonate correctly, but it may be using a lot more bandwidth than is necessary. All right. Responsive images using picture elements and image elements with the source set and sizes, etc., will solve these problems. Now notice it says you can find a detailed thing in the guide to responsive images. Strongly recommend that you take a look at responsive images. I don't believe, yeah, that's here. So that was back in our multimedia and embeddings. Yeah, I remember we went through that then. Much of what's in here, you probably have already realized this, is they'll talk about something and then they'll bring it up again later. All right. An element of responsive design not covered in earlier work was the idea of responsive typography. So what they're saying in here, notice our font size is this, but when you're at a minimum width of 1200 pixels, it should go up to here. So what does that mean? Let's just take a look at this. All right, it says watch my size. And notice not this, not the watch my size, but the rest of it. See how it's shrinking down the size of it when it's at a certain point? As it says, as this approach to typography shows, you do not need to restrict media queries to only changing the layout of a page. In fact, quite often that's what you're going to do, is you're going to work on things like text. All right, an interesting approach is to use the viewport unit, VW, if you remember that's viewport width, to enable responsive typography. 1 VW is equal to 1% of the width, meaning that if you set your font size using VW, it will always relate to the size of the viewport. So let's grab this H1 here. Let's add that here. All right, and I'm going to take this, which was an H2, and I'm going to make it an H1. All right, and let's take a look. There it is. Now, notice as I shrink this down, don't worry about the rest of the stuff. We don't care. Hopefully you can see that the size of it is shrinking based on my screen size. See that? All right. It says if you look at the HTML source on a responsive page, and we talked about this a little earlier, I did mention this, and I did go over what all this means, but let's quickly look at it. It says the meta tag that's shown here tells browsers that they should set the width of the viewport to the device width and scale the document to 100% of its size. So it says, why is this needed? Because mobile browsers tend to lie about their viewport width. This meta tag exists because the original iPhone was launched. People started to view websites on a small phone screen. Most sites had not been optimized. So they were set for 960 pixels, and now you were seeing it on something that was more like half or less than that. All right. So always include that line in the head section of your document. There are other settings that you can put in there as well. You can see them right here. Sometimes you'll see these, sometimes you won't, but at a minimum, you should have this in there always. And as I mentioned before, since we created this and we used Emmet, it automatically put this thing in there for us. Okay. And that's it. We've knocked another one out of here. So when I come back, we will go into the Beginner's Guide for Media Queries. That is the next on our list. So I'll be back with that in just a couple moments.